I moved from a bustling suburb in Ohio to a drafty cottage in the heart of Yorkshire, and let me tell you, my culinary worldview was instantly shattered. Back in the United States, I thought I was a pretty decent cook. I had my air fryer, my pre-washed salad kits, and my non-stick pans. I figured cooking was basically the same everywhere. But then I stepped into a traditional British kitchen, and I was literally shocked by the habits of the older generation. It was like entering a secret society of home economics, where absolutely nothing is wasted, and centuries of trial and error have perfected the art of the meal. The British grandmothers in my neighborhood do things that Americans have completely forgotten, or let's be honest, never even knew in the first place. These are not just quaint little habits to look cute on social media. They are highly efficient, deeply scientific, and incredibly delicious methods developed through wartime rationing, cold winter mornings, and a sheer refusal to let good food go to waste. We need to talk about these old British kitchen tricks, because they will completely transform the way you cook, save you a mountain of money, and make your food taste like it came out of a professional restaurant. Let's start with the holy grail of British Sunday dinner, the roast potato. In America, when we want to make roasted potatoes, we usually chop up some red-skinned or russet potatoes, toss them in a bowl with olive oil, salt and pepper, and throw them on a sheet pan. They come out okay. They are soft in the middle, slightly browned on the outside, but they are not a religious experience. The British roast potato is a masterpiece, and the secret lies in a brutal, noisy trick that older generations have passed down for centuries. To get that glass-like, incredibly crunchy outer crust with an interior that is as light and fluffy as a cloud, you must parboil them first. You peel your potatoes, boil them in salted water for about 10 minutes until the edges are just starting to soften, and then you drain them. But here is the critical step. You do not just let them dry. You put the lid back on the hot metal pot and you shake that pot with absolute force. You want to hear those potatoes slamming against the sides of the pan. When you take the lid off, you will see that the outer edges of the potatoes have turned into a thick, fluffy, mashed potato-like paste. This looks messy, but scientifically you have just released the starches and created a massive surface area of tiny, jagged crevices. When you drop these rough-edged potatoes into a roasting pan filled with screaming hot fat, that starchy paste acts like a natural batter. It absorbs the fat, crisps up to a golden brown, and creates a shell that stays crunchy for hours. In the United States, we would never think to treat our vegetables so aggressively, but once you try the shaking method, you will never go back to your limp, smooth sheet pan potatoes again. Now, speaking of that screaming hot fat for your potatoes, we need to talk about the sacred dripping pot. In my modern American kitchen back home, my cabinet was lined with industrial yellow oils, canola oil, vegetable oil, corn oil, and maybe a bottle of extra virgin olive oil for salads. But in a traditional British kitchen, you will almost always find a ceramic jar sitting proudly next to the stove, filled with a mysterious opaque cream. This is the dripping pot. Older British cooks do not throw away the fat that renders off their meat. When they cook a Sunday roast beef, roast pork, or a whole chicken, they carefully pour the hot liquid gold into this jar. As it cools, it solidifies into a rich, highly seasoned cooking fat. For generations, this was not just a way to save pennies. It was the primary source of flavor in the kitchen. They used this dripping to fry thick slices of bread for breakfast, grease their pie tins, and roast their vegetables. If you want to make authentic Yorkshire puddings, you do not use vegetable oil. You drop a spoonful of hot beef dripping into each cup of the tin before pouring in your batter. The high smoke point of animal fat allows the batter to climb the walls of the tin, creating a towering, crispy, hollow pudding. By replacing processed seed oils with real salvaged animal fats, you are not only cutting down on waste, you are infusing every single dish with a depth of savory flavor that a plastic bottle of canola oil could never dream of achieving. This next one is a habit that used to drive me absolutely crazy when I first moved here, but now I cannot live without it. It is the British obsession with warming plates. In America, we cook a beautiful, piping hot meal, scoop it onto cold ceramic plates straight from the cupboard, and sit down to eat. But British houses, historically, were freezing. Central heating is a relatively modern luxury here, and older stone cottages could feel like refrigerators in the winter. To combat this, older British cooks developed a non-negotiable rule. Your plates and bowls must be hot before the food touches them. They will stack their dinner plates in a low oven, set them on the rack of an Aga stove, or even fill them with boiling water from the kettle and dry them right before serving. At first, I thought this was just an annoying extra step that created unnecessary heat in the kitchen, but there is a massive culinary benefit to this thermal trap. When you put hot gravy, roast meat, or mashed potatoes onto an ice-cold plate, the ceramic instantly acts as a heat sink. Within 60 seconds, the fat in your gravy begins to congeal, the meat tightens up, and your meal is lukewarm before you are even halfway through. A warm plate preserves the delicate textures, keeps the aromas rising from the dish, and ensures that your Sunday roast stays hot from the first bite to the last. It is a tiny, zero-cost adjustment that elevates the entire dining experience. Also, this is exactly the kind of thing I go much deeper on with the people who support this channel directly. So if you are sitting there thinking, okay, I need the fuller version of these British kitchen secrets, join the membership below. That is where I share the deeper thoughts, the more personal side of all this, and the extra bits I cannot always fit into the main videos. Speaking of things that gave me absolute cultural whiplash, we have to talk about the eggs. When I walked into my first British grocery store, I spent 15 minutes wandering the refrigerated dairy aisle looking for carton eggs. I literally could not find them. I finally asked an employee who pointed me toward a regular dry aisle near the baking supplies. There they were, sitting on room temperature shelves. And when you visit a British home, their eggs are almost always displayed on the kitchen counter in a cute ceramic chicken basket. In the United States, we are raised to believe that if an egg sits out of the fridge for more than an hour, it becomes a biological hazard. But there is a fascinating structural and legal reason for this difference. In America, the USDA requires commercial eggs to be washed and sanitized. This high-pressure washing process removes dirt and bacteria, but it also strips away a microscopically thin natural protective coating on the eggshell called the bloom or the cuticle. Without this bloom, the eggshell becomes porous, allowing bacteria to enter, which is why American eggs must be refrigerated to stay safe. In the United Kingdom, the eggs are not washed. The protective bloom remains fully intact, keeping bacteria out naturally. Furthermore, British chickens are widely vaccinated against salmonella, meaning the risk is incredibly low. But keeping eggs on the counter is not just a storage convenience, it is an incredible kitchen trick for anyone who loves to bake. When you use cold eggs straight from the fridge in a cake batter, the cold temperature shocks the creamed butter and sugar, causing the emulsion to split and curdle. Room temperature eggs, on the other hand, incorporate beautifully, trapping air and producing a cake that is significantly lighter, loftier, and more tender. Once you experience how much better your baked goods turn out with room temperature eggs, you will realize that keeping them cold was actually holding your kitchen back. Now, if there is one thing that defines British culture, it is a proper cup of tea. In America, we are notorious for our chaotic tea habits. We fill a mug with tap water, throw it in the microwave for 2 minutes, dangle a dusty tea bag in there by the string, and call it a day. If you do this in front of an older British grandmother, she will look at you with deep, silent pity. To make tea the traditional way, you do not use a microwave and you do not just drop a bag into a mug. You use a proper teapot, and the very first thing you do is warm the pot. Before you even think about adding tea leaves, you pour a splash of boiling water from the kettle into the empty teapot, swirl it around until the ceramic or porcelain is hot to the touch, and then discard that water. This is not just a theatrical ritual. The chemical compounds in tea leaves require a highly consistent boiling temperature to extract properly. If you pour boiling water into a cold teapot, the cold ceramic instantly drops the water temperature by 10 to 15 degrees, resulting in under-extracted, weak, and bitter tea. Once the pot is warmed, you add your tea, pour in fresh boiling water, and immediately cover the pot with a tea cozy. This insulated fabric hood keeps the water at the optimal brewing temperature for the full 5-minute steep. The result is a smooth, rich, robust brew with absolutely no bitterness. It is a masterclass in thermodynamics, and it proves that the old-school British tea ritual is backed by pure science. Quick thing, before we get to the most surprising tricks on this list, the data on this channel shows that over 80% of you watching right now are not subscribed. That means you are showing up for the content, but the algorithm has no reason to show you the next video. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Let's move on to an ingredient that most Americans view with absolute terror: Marmite. For those who do not know, Marmite is a thick, dark brown, incredibly salty paste made from concentrated yeast extract, which is a byproduct of the beer brewing industry. The company's own marketing campaign is literally love it or hate it, and most Americans who try it make the fatal mistake of spreading it like peanut butter on toast, which ruins their palate for days. But older British cooks have a secret. They do not just use Marmite as a spread. They use it as a culinary weapon. A single teaspoon of Marmite stirred into a beef stew, a shepherd's pie, or a pot of Sunday gravy is the ultimate flavor booster. Because Marmite is packed with natural glutamates, it acts as a massive shot of pure umami. It does not make your gravy taste like yeast. Instead, it rounds out the savory notes, deepens the color to a rich dark brown, and gives the sauce a complex, meaty backbone that you cannot get from salt or store-bought stock cubes alone. It is a frugal kitchen trick that dates back to the early 20th century, and it is the reason why traditional British gravies taste so much richer and more comforting than anything we usually whip up in the States. This next one is a physical feature of the British kitchen that baffles almost every American expat who crosses the Atlantic: the plastic washing up bowl. When you look into a British kitchen sink, you will almost always see a colourful plastic tub sitting inside it. To an American, this seems completely redundant. You have a perfectly good stainless steel or ceramic sink, so why are you putting a smaller plastic sink inside your sink? When I first saw this, I thought it was just some quirky, old-fashioned habit. But the history and practicality of the washing up bowl are incredibly clever. Decades ago, British homes did not have double sinks or mixer taps. You had one cold tap and one hot tap, and hot water was expensive and limited. If you filled a massive ceramic sink to wash a few plates, you wasted a huge amount of hot water and energy. By placing a small plastic bowl in the sink, you significantly reduce the volume of water needed to do the dishes. But there is another gentler reason. Traditional British tableware was often made of delicate porcelain or heavy stoneware. If you drop a delicate glass or a vintage teacup onto a hard stainless steel or ceramic sink, it will instantly shatter. Dropping it into a flexible plastic washing up bowl provides a protective cushion. Furthermore, it keeps your main sink clean and dry. You can wash your dishes in the plastic bowl and then easily pour the dirty water away, leaving the surrounding sink free for rinsing. It is a tiny lesson in conservation and preservation that has quietly survived into the era of modern dishwashers. Now let's talk about the incredible British talent for stretching ingredients and wasting absolutely nothing. In a traditional British kitchen, stale bread is never thrown away. While Americans might let a stale loaf sit in the pantry until it molds or throw it out to the birds, older British cooks turn it into a luxurious accompaniment called bread sauce. To an American, the phrase bread sauce sounds bizarre, maybe even slightly unappetizing, but it is actually a smooth, silky, incredibly comforting sauce served alongside roast chicken or turkey. You simmer milk with a peeled onion studded with whole cloves, a bay leaf, and some black peppercorns, allowing the milk to absorb all those warm, aromatic spices. Then you strain the milk and stir in fresh, stale breadcrumbs. The breadcrumbs naturally absorb the liquid, swelling up to thicken the sauce into a velvety, creamy puree. You finish it with a pat of butter and a grate of fresh nutmeg. It is warm, savory, and incredibly comforting, and it is the ultimate historical trick for turning dry, useless bread into a high-end culinary sauce. And speaking of saving pennies, older British cooks have a beautiful habit when it comes to butter wrappers. When they finish a block of butter, they never throw the foil or paper wrapper straight into the bin. They fold it up and store it in the fridge. There is always a tiny, greasy residue of butter clinging to the inside of that paper. When it comes time to grease a cake tin, a loaf pan, or a baking dish, they simply pull out a salvaged wrapper and run it along the metal. It provides the perfect micro-thin layer of grease without wasting a single gram of fresh butter. It is a quiet daily act of mindfulness that reminds us how much abundance we routinely discard in our modern kitchens. Finally, we have to talk about breakfast. In the United States, oatmeal is treated almost like a dessert. We buy instant packets flavored with maple syrup, brown sugar, dried apples, or cinnamon, and we cover it in sweet toppings. It is sugary, sticky, and incredibly sweet. But if you travel up to Scotland or sit down in an old-school British home, the traditional way to make porridge is entirely different. They use whole rolled oats, water, and one non-negotiable ingredient, a solid pinch of salt. No sugar, no honey, no fruit. They cook the oats low and slow on the stovetop, stirring constantly until the starch is released and the porridge becomes incredibly creamy. The salt does not make the oats taste like seawater. Instead, it tempers the natural bitterness of the grain, brings out its deeply nutty flavor, and creates a savory, satisfying base. They serve it in a bowl with a small well in the center, filled with a splash of cold double cream. You dip your spoon of hot savory porridge into the cold cream before taking a bite. The contrast between the hot nutty oats and the rich cold dairy is absolutely spectacular. It is a humble ancient dish that teaches us that sometimes the simplest ingredients, treated with respect and a little bit of salt, are far superior to the oversweetened, processed convenience foods we rely on today. It is these tiny, quiet traditions that make living in the UK such an adventure for me. If you enjoyed this journey into the heart of the traditional British kitchen, and you really want to show some love and support for this channel, please hype this video up. Share it with your friends, leave a comment telling me which of these tricks surprised you the most, and let's get the conversation going. Your energy is what keeps me filming and sharing these stories. These old school tricks are a beautiful reminder that our grandparents and great-grandparents had an incredible wealth of practical wisdom. They did not need expensive gadgets, fancy ingredients, or high-tech appliances to create meals that were warm, comforting, and deeply satisfying. They just needed a hot oven, a solid pot, a bit of patience, and a refusal to waste a single scrap of what they had. Maybe it is time we started bringing some of that quiet, resourceful magic back into our own modern kitchens. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today in my little Yorkshire kitchen. I will see you in the next video.